My father cornered me in the hallway outside the bridal suite, his face inches from mine as he waved the scholarship contract like a weapon. "You will smile, you will be a bridesmaid, and you will give the speech Sarah wrote for you," he hissed, his cologne suffocating in the narrow space. Through the partially open door behind him, I could see my sister Sarah in her pristine white gown, laughing with her bridesmaids while her hand rested protectively over her barely visible baby bump. The same hand that had texted my boyfriend Jake 2 years ago with photos I had found only months later. "If you ruin this day, I cancel your scholarship tomorrow. Do you understand me?" I looked past him into that room where Sarah glowed with her stolen happiness, where my former best friend Emma fixed Sarah's veil with trembling hands because she knew what Sarah had done to me, where my mother pretended not to see me standing in the hallway being threatened. Jake's baby. The thought still made my stomach turn. I had loved him for 3 years, introduced him to my family, believed his promises about our future together. Then Sarah decided she wanted him, and my father decided her happiness mattered more than mine. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone, scrolling to the folder I had labeled Insurance 6 months ago when I first discovered Jake's messages to Sarah. "I understand perfectly, Dad," I said, meeting his eyes with a calmness that made him blink. "I'll be the perfect bridesmaid. I'll smile for every photo, and I'll give a speech everyone will remember." The wedding venue was everything Sarah had dreamed of since we were children playing bride in our backyard. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, white roses cascaded down every surface, and 300 guests filled the pews in designer clothes and forced smiles. I stood at the altar in the pale pink bridesmaid dress Sarah had chosen specifically because it washed out my complexion, holding a bouquet of peonies that matched hers exactly. My father sat in the front row beside my mother, his eyes boring into me with a warning that had worked for 22 years. "Be good. Be quiet. Be invisible next to your golden sister." Jake stood at the altar in his custom tuxedo, the same one he had described to me 2 years ago when we talked about our future wedding. "Something classic," he had said while we lay in my dorm room, his fingers tracing patterns on my shoulder. "Nothing too flashy. Just us and the people we love." Now he smiled at Sarah like she was the only person in the room, like I had never existed, like those 3 years meant nothing. The priest's voice droned on about love and commitment and forever, words that tasted like ash in my mouth. When the priest asked if anyone had any objections to this union, the traditional silence fell over the crowd. I felt my father's glare intensify, felt my mother's hand grip the pew in front of her. Sarah's smile was radiant, confident in her victory. This was her moment. The culmination of 2 years of calculated manipulation and family pressure. She had taken everything from me and expected me to stand here and watch her triumph. I stood up, my phone already in my hand, my voice clear in the sudden shocked silence. "I object," I said, and began to read. "Can't believe Maya actually thinks I care about her," I read from the first message, my voice steady as a scalpel. "The only reason I'm with her is because Harrison money opens doors. Once I'm established in her dad's firm, I'll upgrade to someone worth the effort." The gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. Sarah's face went white, then red. Jake lunged forward, but the groomsman grabbed his arms. I scrolled to the next message, dated 3 months into my relationship with Jake. "Sarah's the hot one anyway. Maya's just convenient. Good grades, quiet, won't make waves when I need to focus on my career. Her dad already promised me a position after graduation." My father stood up, his mouth opening, but I raised my voice and kept reading. "Maya's so desperate for attention she'll believe anything. Told her I loved her last night and she actually cried. Pathetic." The dean of the university, Robert Mitchell, sat 3 rows back as Jake's godfather. I watched his expression shift from confusion to disgust as I continued. "Mitchell's recommendation letter is basically guaranteed now that I'm dating his godson's future sister-in-law. Maya's family connections are the only thing she's good for." Dean Mitchell's face darkened, his jaw clenching as he stared at Jake with open contempt. Sarah finally found her voice, shrill and desperate. "Those are fake. Maya's just jealous because Jake chose me." But I was already reading the next batch. Messages between Sarah and Jake from 18 months ago. "Your sister is so boring in bed. Can't wait to see what you're like," Jake had written. Sarah's response, "Maya never deserved you anyway. She's always been the disappointing daughter. Mom and Dad will get over it once they see how happy we are." My mother made a choking sound. My father's face had gone from red to purple, his hands shaking as he gripped the pew. I scrolled further, finding the message I had been saving. Told Maya I got Sarah pregnant by accident. Jake had written to his best friend 6 months ago. Truth is, we planned it. Sarah said once there's a baby, the Harrisons will have to accept us completely. They'll cut Maya off before they let their grandchild suffer. The silence was absolute now. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. I looked directly at my father, whose scholarship threat had brought me to this moment. Dean Mitchell, I said, turning to face the distinguished man whose godson was currently being restrained by 3 groomsmen. I apologize for disrupting your family event, but I thought you should know that Jake Martinez has been using his relationship with your family to manipulate faculty recommendations and admissions decisions. These messages detail several instances where he name-dropped you to professors in exchange for preferential treatment. Dean Mitchell stood, his expensive suit somehow making him look even more imposing. Ms. Harrison, may I see those messages? His voice was ice. I walked down the aisle, my pink heels clicking against marble, and handed him my phone. The wedding guests sat frozen, 300 witnesses to the destruction of my sister's perfect day. Sarah was crying now, mascara streaming down her face while Jake shouted about privacy and lies and manipulation. But Dean Mitchell was scrolling through months of messages, his expression growing darker with each swipe. These messages reference at least 4 instances of academic fraud, he said loudly, addressing the room, including falsified letters of recommendation, purchased exam answers, and plagiarized thesis work. He looked at Jake with pure contempt. You're expelled, effective immediately. I'll be contacting the State Bar Association to ensure you never practice law. Then he turned to me, his stern face softening slightly. Miss Harrison, I remember your application from 2 years ago. Perfect GPA, exceptional recommendations, volunteer work at 3 legal aid clinics. We rejected you because we'd already accepted Jake based on what I now know was a fraudulent application. My father's purple face had gone pale. He had forced me to settle for a smaller school, a partial scholarship, constant reminders that I wasn't as accomplished as Sarah. The scholarship he had threatened to cancel this morning was worth $30,000. I had worked 3 jobs to cover the rest of my tuition while Sarah lived in a luxury apartment paid for by our parents. I'd like to offer you a full scholarship to our law program, Dean Mitchell continued, including a stipend for living expenses and a guaranteed position in our honors program. We clearly made an error in judgment 2 years ago, and I'd like to correct it. He glanced at Jake with disgust. Assuming you're interested in attending a school that values actual merit over family connections and manipulation. The venue erupted. Sarah collapsed into her maid of honor's arms, wailing about her ruined wedding. Jake was being escorted out by security, still shouting threats about lawsuits and revenge. My mother sat frozen in her pew, her perfect makeup streaked with tears, and my father stood alone in his custom tuxedo, the scholarship contract he had waved at me this morning hanging limp in his hand, watching his golden daughter's fairy tale explode into scandal, while his disappointing daughter received everything he had denied her. I accepted Dean Mitchell's offer in front of 300 witnesses, my voice clear and unwavering. My father stumbled toward me through the chaos, his face a mask of shock and dawning horror. Maya, we need to talk privately, he managed. But I stepped back, keeping the aisle between us. The guests were pulling out phones, typing frantically. By tonight, this wedding disaster would be all over social media, and the Harrison family name my father had sacrificed everything to protect would be synonymous with fraud and betrayal. Sarah's carefully planned reception transformed into a crime scene of sorts. The venue staff wheeled away the 5-tier cake while confused catering teams packed up untouched food. Emma, my former best friend, approached me near the gift table, her bridesmaid dress matching my own humiliating pink. I wanted to tell you so many times, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Sarah made me promise not to. She said it would destroy the family. The family was already destroyed, I replied, watching my father try to calm hysterical relatives who were demanding explanations. I just made everyone else see it. Emma handed me a flash drive, her hands shaking. There's more. Sarah kept a journal on her laptop about the whole thing, how she seduced Jake, how she convinced your parents you were too unstable for law school, how she got Jake to sabotage your original application to Dean Mitchell's university. I copied everything last night because I couldn't watch this happen anymore. I pocketed the drive, making mental notes. My father had told Dean Mitchell 2 years ago that I was dealing with mental health issues that made me unsuitable for their rigorous program. I had never been evaluated, never shown any signs of instability. Just my father covering for Sarah's schemes, protecting his favorite daughter at any cost. The full picture was becoming clear now, and it was so much worse than I had imagined. My mother finally approached, her designer gown wilting in the air conditioning. "You've humiliated us," she hissed, low enough that nearby guests couldn't hear. "Your sister is pregnant and unmarried now. Do you understand what you've done to her future?" I stared at her, this woman who had stood by while my father threatened me this morning, who had watched Sarah steal my boyfriend and said nothing, who had attended every one of Sarah's events while missing my college graduation because it conflicted with Sarah's spa day. "Sarah's future?" I repeated, loud enough that several guests turned to listen. "What about my future when you told Dean Mitchell I was mentally unstable? What about my future when you let Dad force me into a school I couldn't afford? What about my future when Sarah seduced my boyfriend and you threw her an engagement party?" My mother's face went white. She hadn't known I knew about that particular lie. The venue manager approached, clipboard in hand, professional smile strained. "Mr. Harrison, we need to discuss the final payment. The contract specified full payment upon completion of the ceremony, but given the circumstances." My father pulled out his wallet with shaking hands, but I noticed something. The way his fingers fumbled, the sweat on his forehead, the slight tremor when he handed over his credit card. That wasn't just embarrassment, that was fear. I excused myself to the bathroom, pulled out my phone, and called my roommate Jasmine, who worked as a paralegal. "Remember how you said you'd help me with anything I needed?" I asked. "I need you to pull the financial records we discussed last month. Every transaction my father made related to my education versus Sarah's, and I need it tonight." Jasmine, who had watched me work 3 jobs while Sarah posted vacation photos from Bali, agreed immediately. When I returned to the main hall, Dean Mitchell was speaking with my father in hushed tones near the bar. I positioned myself close enough to hear without being obvious. "I've already contacted the State Bar Association," Mitchell was saying. "Given Jake's fraudulent application and your misrepresentation of your daughter's mental fitness, there will be an investigation into whether you knowingly participated in academic fraud. Your firm handles several university contracts, correct?" My father's face went gray. Harrison and Associates had 3 major contracts with Mitchell's University, worth approximately $2 million annually. If the investigation found deliberate fraud, those contracts would be terminated, and my father's reputation in legal circles would be destroyed. I watched him process this, watched the calculations happen behind his eyes, watched him realize that protecting Sarah had cost him everything he had spent 30 years building. Sarah found me as I was collecting my coat. Her makeup was ruined, her dress torn at the hem where she had tried to chase after Jake. "You destroyed my life," she sobbed, gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. "I loved him. We were going to be a family." I gently removed her hand, noticing how the guests were watching, phones still recording. Every moment of this disaster would be preserved forever. "You destroyed my life 2 years ago," I said calmly. "You just didn't notice because you were too busy enjoying the spoils." I held up my phone, showing her the screen where I had pulled up more messages. "Did you know Jake was cheating on you? With at least 3 other women? All of them connected to powerful families he wanted to impress?" Sarah's face crumpled. "Or that he told his friends the baby was his retirement plan because he expected Dad to set up a trust fund?" Sarah sank to her knees on the marble floor, her white dress pooling around her like a deflated parachute. Our mother rushed over, shooting me a look of pure venom, but I was done caring about their opinions. Dean Mitchell appeared at my elbow with a formal letter on university letterhead, the scholarship offer in writing. "I've also included contact information for our housing office," he said. "We have graduate apartments available immediately if you'd like to transfer schools for the spring semester." Spring semester started in 6 weeks. I could be out of my father's house, away from Sarah's dramatics, free from the scholarship threats and manipulation. I signed the acceptance letter right there, using the gift table as a desk, surrounded by unopened presents for a wedding that would never be completed. My father watched from across the room, his empire crumbling around him, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The next morning, I woke up to 73 missed calls and 216 text messages. The wedding disaster had gone viral overnight, with hashtags like messages from hell and scholarship revenge trending across multiple platforms. Someone had recorded my reading of Jake's messages and posted it everywhere. By breakfast, 3 major news outlets had requested interviews about academic fraud and family manipulation. My father appeared in my bedroom doorway at 7 a.m., still wearing yesterday's wrinkled tuxedo shirt. "We need to contain this," he said, his voice hoarse from what I assumed was a night of crisis management calls. Dean Mitchell is threatening to pull all university contracts. The state bar is opening an investigation. Your mother's charity board is demanding her resignation. Sarah won't stop crying. You need to make a statement saying those messages were fabricated. I looked up from my laptop where I was filling out transfer paperwork for Dean Mitchell's university. No. His face reddened. Maya, I know we've had our differences, but this affects the entire family. Your future siblings-in-law, your cousins, everyone who depends on Harrison and Associates for employment. You can't just... I can, I interrupted, pulling up the financial records Jasmine had sent me at 2 a.m. Did you know I have documentation showing you spent $412,000 on Sarah's education, living expenses, and lifestyle over the past 4 years, while I received a total of $37,000 in scholarship support that came with strings attached? I turned the laptop to face him. I also have emails between you and Dean Mitchell from 2 years ago, where you explicitly stated I was emotionally volatile and prone to dramatic episodes, to convince him I was unsuitable for their program. I've never seen a therapist, Dad. There's no medical record of any mental health issues, just your lies. My father's face went from red to white. Where did you get those emails? Emma, I said simply. Sarah's maid of honor who's been documenting everything for the past year because she felt guilty. She has recordings too, voice memos of Sarah bragging about seducing Jake, about convincing you I was unstable, about planning the pregnancy to lock down the Harrison money. I pulled out the flash drive Emma had given me. Would you like to hear them? Or should we skip ahead to the part where you decide whether to negotiate with me or watch me give these to every news outlet that's been calling? The power shift was visible. My father had spent 22 years controlling me through money, through fear, through carefully constructed family dynamics that positioned Sarah as the golden child and me as the disappointment. Now I held every card, and he knew it. What do you want? He asked finally. Nothing from you, I replied. I want you to leave me alone. No more calls, no more manipulation, no more threats. I'm transferring to Dean Mitchell's school in 6 weeks, and you're going to stay out of my life completely. I stood up, matching his height in my heels. And you're going to tell everyone who asks that you support my decision, that you're proud of me, and that the Harrison family wishes me well. Otherwise, these recordings and financial records go to the state bar, the IRS, and every news organization that wants them. My mother appeared behind him, her face haggard without makeup. You would destroy your own family? She asked, her voice breaking. Your sister is pregnant and alone. Jake's disappeared. Sarah needs us right now. Sarah needs to face consequences, I said, looking directly at her. And you need to explain to your charity board why you enabled academic fraud and financial manipulation. I found the email where you told Dean Mitchell I had a history of emotional instability too, Mom. You both lied to protect Sarah, and now you're both going to deal with the fallout. The doorbell rang, interrupting our standoff. I walked past my parents to answer it, finding 2 police officers on the porch with grim expressions. We're looking for Jake Martinez, the taller officer said. Is he here? Behind me, my father made a strangled sound. I stepped aside, gesturing them in. He doesn't live here, but his former fiancée, Sarah Harrison, is upstairs. She might know where he is. The officers exchanged glances. We have a warrant for his arrest on charges of academic fraud, identity theft, and forgery. Apparently, he's been using stolen credentials to practice law without a license for the past 6 months. Dean Mitchell filed the complaint this morning. The shorter officer pulled out a notepad. We understand you have evidence related to these charges. I handed them my phone with the message folder open. Everything's documented here, including messages where Jake discusses forging letters of recommendation, bribing teaching assistants, and using my family's connections to obtain internships he wasn't qualified for. The officer scrolled through silently, his expression darkening. There's also evidence that my sister Sarah Harrison may have knowingly assisted in some of this fraud. She helped him prepare false application materials and provided access to my father's law firm resources. My mother gasped. Maya, you can't possibly... Sarah's pregnant, I said to the officers, cutting my mother off. I'm not sure how that affects anything legally, but I thought you should know. The taller officer nodded, making a note. We'll need to speak with her regardless. Is she here? Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs, still in her pajamas, her face puffy from crying. When she saw the police officers, she froze. What's happening? Miss Harrison, we need to ask you some questions about Jake Martinez and potential academic fraud, the officer said professionally. You have the right to have an attorney present. My father stepped forward, his lawyer instincts overriding his shock. Don't say anything. Sarah, I'll call our attorney. But the officers were already reading Sarah her rights, explaining that she could be charged as an accessory to fraud if evidence showed she knowingly participated in Jake's schemes. I watched my sister's face crumple, watched my mother rush to support her, watched my father realize that protecting Sarah this time might cost him his law license. Dean Mitchell called my phone as the officers were escorting Sarah to their patrol car for questioning. "I wanted you to know that the university board met this morning," he said. "We're terminating all contracts with Harrison and Associates effective immediately. We've also opened an investigation into other students Jake may have helped cheat the system. Your evidence has been invaluable." He paused. "I'm also personally ensuring that your scholarship includes full housing, meal plan, and a research assistant position. You've shown more integrity in one day than most people show in a lifetime." I thanked him and ended the call, turning to find my father staring at me from the doorway. His law firm had just lost $2 million in annual contracts. His daughter was being questioned about fraud charges. His wife was facing resignation from every social position she held. And his disappointing daughter had orchestrated all of it by simply telling the truth. "I hope it was worth it," he said bitterly. "It was," I replied, returning to my transfer paperwork. Every single second. 3 weeks after the wedding disaster, I sat in my new apartment near Dean Mitchell's university, watching the news coverage of Jake Martinez's arrest on multiple felony charges. The investigation had expanded to reveal a network of academic fraud involving 12 other students, 3 professors, and 2 admissions counselors. Jake's face was plastered across every major outlet. The golden boy who had manipulated his way through law school now facing 15 years in federal prison. Sarah had been charged as an accessory but accepted a plea deal that included probation, community service, and a permanent mark on her record that would prevent her from ever working in law, education, or any field requiring background checks. She had moved in with our maternal grandmother in Florida, unable to face the social destruction in our hometown. The baby was due in 4 months, and according to my grandmother's reluctant updates, Sarah spent most days crying and refusing to leave the house. My father's law firm was under federal investigation. 3 major clients had terminated their contracts, and 2 junior partners had quit to distance themselves from the scandal. Harrison and Associates, which had employed 23 people and generated $5 million annually, was hemorrhaging money and reputation. My father had aged 10 years in 3 weeks, his hair suddenly grayer, his face lined with stress. My mother had resigned from every charity board, every social committee, every position she had held in our community. Her best friend had stopped taking her calls. The country club had politely suggested she suspend her membership. The woman who had built her entire identity on social standing and family prestige was now a pariah, and she blamed me completely. I received a letter from my mother on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered to my new address despite my instructions for no contact. The handwriting was shaky, the paper tear-stained. "You have destroyed this family," she wrote. "Your father may lose his law license. Sarah is a single mother with no prospects. I have lost everything I worked for. And for what? Revenge? Pride? You could have handled this privately, but you chose public humiliation. I hope you're satisfied with yourself." I was satisfied. Deeply, completely satisfied. I had spent 22 years being invisible, being told I wasn't as smart as Sarah, wasn't as pretty as Sarah, wasn't worthy of the same investment and support. I had worked 3 jobs while Sarah vacationed in Europe. I had studied in a shared apartment with 4 roommates while Sarah lived in luxury. I had been told I was mentally unstable while Sarah was praised for her ambition. And when I finally exposed the truth, when I finally showed everyone exactly what my golden sister and her accomplice had done, my parents wanted me to feel guilty about it. I threw the letter away and returned to my torts homework. Dean Mitchell's university was everything I had hoped for. Rigorous, challenging, and merit-based. My professors knew my name. My research assistant position gave me valuable experience, and my scholarship covered everything without strings attached. I had joined study groups, made friends who valued intelligence over social status, and started dating a fellow law student who thought my viral wedding speech was the most badass thing he'd ever seen. On a Friday evening, 6 weeks after the wedding, my father called from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Maya?" His voice was rough, defeated. "I need to talk to you about the state bar investigation. They're asking about the financial discrepancies between your education funding and Sarah's. They want to know if I deliberately undermined your opportunities to benefit Sarah." "And did you?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Long silence. Then, barely audible, "Yes." I let that admission hang in the air. My father, who had spent my entire life telling me I wasn't good enough, that I needed to be more like Sarah, that my accomplishments didn't matter, was finally admitting what I had always known. He had sabotaged me deliberately, systematically, cruelly. The state bar is probably going to recommend suspension of my license, he continued. 6 months to a year. The firm will have to close. Everyone will lose their jobs. I'm asking you, as your father, to consider writing a statement that might help mitigate. No, I said simply. Maya, please. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your father. The people at the firm did nothing wrong. They have families, mortgages, responsibilities. If you spent $400,000 on Sarah's education while giving me barely enough to survive, I interrupted. You told Dean Mitchell I was mentally unstable to prevent me from attending his university. You threatened to cancel my scholarship if I didn't participate in Sarah's fraudulent wedding. You made my entire childhood about serving Sarah's needs and swallowing my own pain. And now you want me to help you avoid consequences? I'm begging you, he said. And I heard something I'd never heard before in my father's voice. Genuine desperation. Please, Maya, I'll do anything. There's nothing you can offer that I want, I replied. You gave Sarah everything, and I built my own life without you. Enjoy your suspension, Dad. Use the time to reflect on your choices. I ended the call and blocked the number. 2 months later, the state bar suspended my father's license for 1 year and imposed a $50,000 fine for ethics violations related to academic fraud. Harrison and Associates closed permanently. My father took a job as a paralegal at a small firm making $40,000 a year, a fraction of his previous income. My mother got a job as a receptionist at a dental office, her first employment in 30 years. They sold their house and moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood they had once considered beneath them. Sarah gave birth to a boy she named after Jake's grandfather, apparently still clinging to delusion. She worked part-time at a retail store while living with our grandmother, who watched the baby during Sarah's shifts. According to social media posts I occasionally checked, Sarah spent her evenings alone, her former friends having abandoned her after the scandal. The golden daughter who had everything was now a cautionary tale about ambition and manipulation. Jake was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and identity theft. The judge specifically referenced the messages I had read at the wedding, calling them a disturbing window into calculated sociopathy. Jake's parents disowned him publicly. His godfather, Dean Mitchell, gave a statement calling Jake's behavior a betrayal of every value our family holds. Jake would be nearly 40 when released, his law career destroyed before it started, his reputation permanently ruined. I graduated summa cum laude from Dean Mitchell's University 3 years later, top of my class with offers from 6 prestigious firms. I accepted a position at a corporate law firm in Manhattan, making $140,000 annually, more than my father had ever made at Harrison and Associates. My apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, paid for entirely by my own success. Dean Mitchell attended my graduation, sitting with my grandmother who had flown in from Florida. My parents were not invited. Sarah sent a card that I threw away without reading. Jake was still in prison, 9 years remaining on his sentence. The last I heard, he worked in the prison library and had been denied parole twice. My former roommate Emma, who had helped expose Sarah's schemes, became my closest friend. She had transferred to a different law school, and we practiced together now at competing firms, meeting for lunch weekly to laugh about how far we'd come. Remember when you stood up at that wedding? She asked during one lunch. I thought you were insane. Turns out you were a genius. I was angry, I corrected. But anger isn't always bad if you channel it correctly. On the anniversary of Sarah's ruined wedding, I received a letter from my father at my Manhattan office. He had found my work address somehow, determined to maintain contact despite my explicit wishes. I'm proud of you. The letter read, despite everything, you've accomplished more than I ever imagined. Maybe we could have dinner sometime? I'd like to try to rebuild our relationship. I shredded the letter without responding. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. Some families aren't worth salvaging. My father had chosen Sarah over me every single day of my life, until the consequences became unavoidable. Now he wanted credit for my success. Wanted to claim some parental role in achievements he had actively tried to prevent. The answer was no. It would always be no. My mother tried texting from a new number. Sarah's son asks about his aunt sometimes. He's 3 now. Don't you want to know your nephew? I blocked the number immediately. Sarah's child was innocent, but I had no obligation to maintain relationships with people who had shown me nothing but cruelty. Let Sarah explain to her son someday why his aunt wasn't in their lives. Let her admit what she did. At 30 years old, I made partner at my firm, the youngest in company history. The celebration included champagne, congratulations from colleagues who knew nothing about my family history, and a phone call from Dean Mitchell, who had followed my career with grandfatherly pride. "Your success is the best possible outcome from that terrible situation," he said. "You took their worst and turned it into your best." Meanwhile, my father was still working as a paralegal. My mother was still answering phones at the dental office, and Sarah was still living with our grandmother, working retail, raising a child alone. They had chosen their paths through manipulation, lies, and favoritism. I had chosen mine through honesty, hard work, and refusing to accept their narrative about my worth. I never forgave them. I never felt guilty about the consequences they faced. They had planted seeds of cruelty and deceit, and I had simply ensured they reaped exactly what they had sown. The golden daughter had tarnished, the disappointing daughter had become gold, and the family that tried to control me through shame and obligation discovered that truth, spoken at the right moment, is the most devastating weapon of all. Sometimes late at night, I wondered if my father understood yet that his mistake wasn't just favoring Sarah. His mistake was underestimating me, assuming my silence meant acceptance, believing I would swallow injustice forever rather than risk their approval. He had gambled everything on my compliance and lost spectacularly. I slept soundly in my Manhattan apartment, surrounded by evidence of success built entirely on my own merit, while 300 miles away my family lived with the permanent consequences of their choices. They wanted forgiveness, reconciliation, a chance to be part of my accomplished life. I wanted them to remember every single day exactly what they had sacrificed when they decided I didn't matter. Justice, I learned, isn't always about courts and lawyers. Sometimes justice is simply living well while those who hurt you face the natural consequences of their cruelty. Sometimes the best revenge is becoming everything they said you couldn't be, and refusing to share that success with the people who tried to ensure your failure. Update. 5 years after making partner, I received an unexpected email that would test everything I thought I had resolved about my family. The subject line read, "Urgent, Sarah Harrison medical emergency," and came from Tampa General Hospital in Florida where my grandmother lived. My first instinct was to delete it. Sarah and I hadn't spoken in 8 years, not since that wedding disaster that had exposed her fraud and destroyed her carefully constructed life. I had built walls specifically designed to keep my toxic family out, and those walls had served me well. But something made me open the email anyway, perhaps morbid curiosity about what could possibly constitute an emergency worthy of contacting me. The message was brief and clinical. Sarah had been admitted with complications from what appeared to be advanced cervical cancer, stage 3. The prognosis was uncertain, but treatment would be aggressive and expensive. Our grandmother, now 86 and struggling with her own health issues, couldn't manage both Sarah's medical needs and her 8-year-old grandson. The hospital social worker was reaching out to any available family members. I stared at my computer screen in my corner office overlooking Manhattan, processing this information with the same detachment I applied to complex legal cases. Sarah had cancer. Sarah needed help. Sarah's son, my nephew, whom I'd never met, was apparently caught in the middle of this medical crisis, and someone thought I should care. My assistant knocked on the door, reminding me about the partner meeting in 10 minutes. I closed the email and returned to the merger documents I'd been reviewing, compartmentalizing Sarah's emergency with practiced efficiency. I had a conference call with Tokyo at 6, a deposition preparation at 8, and a client dinner at 9. Sarah's cancer didn't fit into my schedule or my carefully maintained emotional boundaries, but the email haunted me through the partner meeting, through the Tokyo call, through the deposition prep. Not because I felt guilty. I had long ago processed and released any obligation to the family that had treated me as expendable. What bothered me was the 8-year-old boy, Sarah's son, my nephew, a child who had done nothing wrong but was about to learn what it meant to have a mother with cancer and a family fractured beyond repair. That evening, instead of attending the client dinner, I called the hospital in Tampa. The social worker, a weary-sounding woman named Patricia, confirmed the details. Sarah's cancer was advanced, likely because she had avoided medical care due to lack of insurance. Treatment would require surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. The estimated cost exceeded $300,000. Sarah worked retail with minimal benefits. Our grandmother lived on Social Security. Our parents, still working entry-level jobs to rebuild from their financial collapse 8 years ago, had nothing to contribute. What about the child's father? I asked, already knowing the answer. In prison, Patricia replied matter-of-factly. No financial resources. The boy's grandmother is doing her best, but she's elderly and dealing with her own health issues. We're looking at possible foster care placement if we can't stabilize the family situation. Foster care. My nephew, a child I'd never met, whose existence I'd deliberately ignored, might end up in the system because my sister had made terrible choices and our family had imploded. I felt a twist of something unfamiliar in my chest. Not guilt exactly, but recognition that this situation extended beyond the adults who had created it. I need to think about this, I told Patricia. Give me 48 hours. I spent those 48 hours doing what I do best. Researching, analyzing, calculating. I pulled Sarah's medical records with her signed authorization, consulted with oncologists I knew through legal work, and reviewed treatment options and success rates. Stage 3 cervical cancer had approximately 60% 5-year survival rate with aggressive treatment. Without treatment, Sarah would likely be dead within 18 months. I also hired a private investigator to gather information about Sarah's current life. The report arrived within 24 hours, painting a picture far different from the golden daughter who had stolen my boyfriend and wrecked my father's career. Sarah lived in a rundown apartment in a questionable neighborhood. She worked 40 hours a week at a discount clothing store, making $13 an hour. Her son attended public school and participated in exactly 0 extracurricular activities because Sarah couldn't afford them. She had no savings, no assets, no safety net. The investigator's report included photos. Sarah, at 35, looked 50. Her face lined with stress and hardship. Her body thin in a way that spoke of missed meals and constant worry. And there was my nephew, a skinny kid with Sarah's eyes and Jake's jawline, wearing clothes that were slightly too small and shoes that were coming apart at the seams. He was smiling in one photo, playing basketball with other kids in the apartment complex, and something about that smile made my carefully constructed walls crack slightly. This child had done nothing to me. He didn't steal my boyfriend or help fake academic credentials or stand by while my father threatened to destroy my scholarship. He was just a kid whose mother had cancer and whose family tree was full of people who had failed each other spectacularly. And I was the only person in that tree with resources to help. I made the decision on a Wednesday evening in my apartment, staring out at Central Park while drinking wine that cost more than Sarah made in a week. I would pay for Sarah's treatment. All of it. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, follow-up care, whatever she needed. Not because I forgave her. Not because we were rebuilding our relationship. Not because family meant unconditional support despite betrayal and cruelty. I would pay because her 8-year-old son deserved a chance to grow up with his mother, and because I had the means to provide that chance. But there would be conditions. Strict, non-negotiable conditions that would ensure this arrangement stayed transactional and businesslike. I called Patricia the next morning. "I'll cover Sarah's medical expenses," I said, "but I need you to facilitate a meeting, Sarah, my grandmother, and myself, in person, before any money changes hands." The meeting took place the following Sunday in a conference room at Tampa General Hospital. I flew down on Saturday evening and stayed in a luxury hotel near the beach, preparing myself mentally for seeing Sarah face-to-face for the first time in 8 years. I wore my armor, a tailored suit, expensive heels, the cool professional demeanor that had served me well in countless negotiations. Sarah was brought in by wheelchair, already weak from the untreated cancer. She looked up at me with eyes that held a complicated mixture of hope, shame, and desperate need. Our grandmother sat beside her, aged and frail, her hands trembling slightly. I remained standing, maintaining physical and psychological distance. "I'll pay for your treatment," I said without preamble, "under the following conditions. First, you sign a legal document acknowledging that this is a one-time financial arrangement, not a reconciliation or restoration of family relationship. Second, you agree to have no contact with me beyond medical updates through Patricia. Third, you acknowledge in writing what you did 8 years ago, the fraud, the manipulation, the lies, and that document becomes part of the legal agreement. Fourth, if you survive this cancer, you will use whatever time you have to be a good mother to your son, and if he ever asks about me, you will tell him the truth about why we're not in contact." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Maya, I'm so sorry." "I don't want your apology," I interrupted. "I want your signature on these documents and your commitment to the terms. This isn't about forgiveness or rebuilding trust. This is about giving your son a chance to have his mother, because he deserves that even if you don't." My grandmother spoke for the first time, her voice quavering. "Maya, sweetheart, she's your sister. Doesn't that mean anything?" "It meant something 8 years ago," I replied. looking directly at my grandmother, who had enabled so much of Sarah's behavior. It meant something when I was working 3 jobs while Sarah vacationed in Europe. It meant something when Dad threatened my scholarship to make me participate in her fraudulent wedding. It meant something when she watched Jake steal my future and did nothing to stop it. Family meant everything to me until my family taught me it meant nothing to them. I placed the documents on the table, 20 pages of legal agreements drafted by my firm's best contract attorneys. Sarah would receive full funding for her cancer treatment in exchange for written acknowledgement of her past actions, permanent no-contact terms with me, and a commitment to honest parenting if she survived. Sarah read through the documents slowly, tears streaming down her face. "You really hate me that much?" "I don't hate you," I said truthfully. "I don't feel anything about you at all anymore, but I can afford to save your life. And your son deserves to have his mother if that's medically possible. So I'm offering you survival with conditions. You can accept or refuse." She signed. So did our grandmother as witness. I had the documents notarized immediately by a hospital administrator Patricia had arranged to have on standby. Sarah's treatment began the following week, funded by a medical trust I established specifically for this purpose. I returned to Manhattan and resumed my life, checking in weekly with Patricia for updates, but maintaining zero direct contact with Sarah or our grandmother. The treatment was brutal. Sarah endured surgery that removed her cervix and surrounding tissue, followed by 6 months of aggressive chemotherapy and radiation. She lost her hair, lost 30 pounds she couldn't afford to lose, and spent weeks hospitalized with complications. Through it all, Patricia sent me clinical updates that I read with professional detachment. Sarah was responding to treatment. Sarah had developed an infection. Sarah's tumor markers were decreasing. My nephew was staying with our grandmother during the worst of it, missing school occasionally but maintaining decent grades despite the chaos. 18 months after our hospital meeting, Patricia called with unexpected news. Sarah was in remission. The cancer was undetectable. She would need regular monitoring and checkups, but her prognosis was good. The treatment I had funded had worked. "She wants to thank you," Patricia said. "She's written you several letters, but I've returned them per your agreement. She just wants you to know she's grateful and she's keeping her promises." "Good," I replied. "Continue to send me the monitoring reports every 6 months. Otherwise, we're done." But we weren't quite done. 6 months later, I received an email directly from my nephew. The subject line read, "Thank you from Jackson." He had somehow found my work email, determined and resourceful in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of myself at his age. The email was brief and grammatically perfect. "Dear Aunt Maya, my mom told me what you did. She said you saved her life even though you didn't have to because she hurt you really bad when you were younger. She said you have every right to never talk to us, and I respect that. But I wanted to say thank you anyway. I know I'll probably never meet you, but you gave me my mom back and I'll never forget that. I hope you're happy and successful. From the pictures online, it looks like you are. Respectfully, Jackson Martinez Harrison." I read that email 17 times, feeling something crack in the walls I'd so carefully maintained. This child understood boundaries, understood consequences, understood that gratitude didn't equal entitlement to relationship. He had somehow learned, at 9 years old, a maturity that most adults never achieved. And he was thanking me not for forgiveness or reconciliation, but simply for giving him his mother. I responded briefly, "Jackson, your mother made many mistakes, but having you wasn't one of them. Work hard in school, be kind to people who deserve it, and remember that your worth isn't defined by your parents' choices. You're welcome. Maya." I never heard from him again. Sarah kept her promises, maintaining no contact beyond the medical updates Patricia sent every 6 months. The cancer stayed in remission. My nephew graduated elementary school, then middle school, then apparently got a scholarship to a private high school based on academic achievement. I tracked these milestones through occasional internet searches, maintaining my distance while quietly acknowledging his existence. My parents tried reaching out several times over the years, but I maintained my boundaries. My father sent a letter when he finally got his law license reinstated after 5 years, hoping to rebuild our relationship. I didn't respond. My mother sent a card when I made senior partner at 38, the youngest in my firm's history. I threw it away unread. They had made their choices, and they lived with the consequences. So did I. Now, at 42, I sometimes think about that hospital meeting in Tampa, about funding my sister's cancer treatment while maintaining absolute emotional distance, about the 8-year-old boy who became a teenager who apparently became a scholarship student, because someone broke the cycle of dysfunction and entitlement in our family. I didn't forgive Sarah. I didn't rebuild our family. I didn't let go of my boundaries or pretend that blood erased betrayal. I simply made a business decision that happened to save a life and give a child his mother. The walls I built to protect myself from my toxic family remain intact and necessary. But sometimes, late at night in my Manhattan apartment, I search Jackson's name online and see photos of a smart, serious young man who doesn't carry the entitled smugness Sarah had or the manipulative charm Jake possessed. He looks like someone who understands that nothing is owed to you, that everything must be earned, and that gratitude doesn't require relationship. Maybe that's Sarah's one genuine accomplishment, raising a child who learned from her mistakes rather than repeating them. Or maybe it's just who Jackson is despite everything, determined, principled, and wise beyond his years. Either way, he's alive. His mother is alive. And I sleep soundly knowing I made the choice that aligned with who I am. Someone who doesn't forgive cruelty, but doesn't punish innocence either. The family that tried to destroy me got exactly what they deserved. The child caught in the aftermath got what he deserved too, a chance. And I remain exactly where I earned the right to be, successful, boundaried, and completely at peace with every decision I've made.